All right, we're live. Welcome to American Spirits episode 21, where we will be discussing George Washington's famous farewell address, which is often cited, probably miscited, I think rarely ever actually read. Interestingly, it's no longer read in Congress. But before we get into that, welcome, guys. I see we have our Santa hats on. Thank you for showing up with your Santa hats. Uh, how are you doing, Ryan, this December 1st?
I'm doing very well. Advent is off to a very cozy beginning at the Turnipseed household. How are you doing?
Uh, I'm very tired due to various winter associated disasters. And also, I am starting to use an excavator to dig giant holes, and that's fun. And then, Mr. Auberon Quinn, welcome back after your break. How are you doing?
In the spirit of Advent, I am ready to impose some penance upon the audience. Last week, you were graced by the inestimable Mr. George Bagby, and I am pleased to inform the chat that you must now content yourselves with dollar store George Bagby.
Excellent. Well, okay, so yes, this is pretty straightforward. It's Washington's famous farewell address, which people often cite, in terms of usually in the context of foreign alliances and that sort of thing. And that is in here, but there are a few other interesting things as well. And perhaps that's a bit misused as well. I found that the one of the least interesting parts, to be honest. Interestingly, as I was getting to as well, I'll just quote really here from page double I, Roman numeral II. The practice of reading the farewell address did not immediately become a tradition. The address was first read in regular legislative sessions of the Senate in 1888 and the House in 1899. The House continued the practice until 1984. Since 1993, the Senate has observed Washington's birthday and by selecting one of its members to read the farewell address. End quote. So I just thought that was kind of interesting, especially since the House stopped doing it. Um, but anyway, we said we would start a bit into the address on page 5 of our little PDF here, where once he's sort of gotten through all of the flowery language about his duty to his country, but also the need for him to resign and whatnot. Ryan, where would you like to start us off?
Actually, page 2, there's a paragraph in the middle of the introduction, which in any other historical context, the introduction is interesting. In like a legal context, in the informal tradition, at least until the post-FDR era of 2 terms and whatnot else, the introduction is interesting. For us, though, it's not interesting because we care about the substance of this. And Washington introduces the substance on the paragraph currently on screen. I'll read it here. Washington says, "The acceptance of and continuance hitherto in the office to which your suffrages have twice called me have been a uniform sacrifice of inclination to the opinion of duty and to a deference for what appeared to be your desire. I constantly hoped that it would have been much earlier in my power, consistently with motives which I was not at liberty to disregard, to return to that retirement from which I had been reluctantly drawn. The strength of my inclination to do this, previous to the last election, had even led to the preparation of an address to declare it to you. But mature reflection on the then perplexed and critical posture of our affairs with foreign nations, and the unanimous advice of persons entitled to my confidence, impelled me to abandon the idea." So this is Washington saying that he has only stayed in office because of foreign policy, basically, because of foreign affairs. And just as a very brief bit of background for the audience, Washington's second term saw increasing turmoil in France and eventually the height of the Revolutionary Terror, I guess it would be, or not the height of the terror, but the beginnings of the revolution. There were factional disputes within Washington's cabinet as to whether we should honor our alliance with France, which had existed since they helped us in our revolution, or if we should abandon it, or, and the third option, if we should go all in with Great Britain. So those were the factions developing. This will become relevant later. Washington will almost directly address that. During Washington's second term, he basically rescinded the treaty with France and declared that we had no obligation to defend French colonial possessions just because they helped us. Um, at the time, the Francophile faction within the government thought that this was cowardice in moral terms, and then in political terms, perhaps opportunism. The French had helped us. They gave us material, manpower, money, and quite a lot of it at that. And then we won't help them at their time of need. Others thought that it was just good policy. But this is the idea that Washington is going to use to justify it, and one that sticks around at least until the First and Second World Wars, which is that we are not bound to any perpetual alliances. We are not supposed to enslave ourselves to the interests of other countries. American foreign policy purely exists to defend the American people and support their interests. So that's this is sort of the foreign affairs backdrop which kept Washington in office. As he's saying, he would have just gone back into retirement had these events not played out. There were also scandals with France and its revolutionary government that would that would plague both the French Revolutionary government and the nativists in the American cabinet. There was the Citizen Genet affair, in which the French diplomat for the revolutionaries sought to recruit American privateers, but basically bypassed the American government in doing so. Basically, France sent an emissary over here as a diplomat and used it purely to get our people to go and privateer for France. This was seen as a major diplomatic faux pas, and for most of the nativists, which was a now rising sentiment in the country, it was sort of a red flag or an alarm bell that foreign interests were seeking to dominate the country and enslave us to what they wanted instead of our own benefit. So that's the backdrop.
Yeah, and that's well, it's the backdrop for half of it because Washington's farewell address is going to touch on two main themes. One of them foreign, which Ryan just took us through, and one of them domestic. The foreign theme, as we'll see, is the posture that the United States should take towards foreign nations, and we'll get through that in elaborate detail going forward. And then the domestic theme is on the unity of government, the binding of the nation into under one government, and how critical Washington views that as being to the prosperity of the American nation. We talked at great length for several months about the Articles of Confederation, the transfer to the Constitution, and how all that went down. And here you're kind of seeing Washington wrapping that up and giving the final defense for the constitutional system under which we still nominally endure.
Yes, and I'm glad you gave us this backdrop as well. Just to remind the audience, the George Washington's term started in 1789, which is exactly when the French Revolution began. And he's leaving office in 1797. French Revolution, ends in 1799 in terms of that particular part of it. Obviously, you have the forget the name of the government, but the Napoleonic years and whatever past that. So France is in a state of heavy turmoil. In terms of, this idea that we owe France, I'll just comment myself that, how much do we owe France for helping us with the revolution? Well, really winning the revolution was the help they wanted. I mean, France wasn't helping us because they were really nice friends and stuff. They were helping us in order to damage the British, and damage the British we did. Obviously, there's some sort of obligation there to, at least maintain friendly relations with the French. But I don't think that the United States has some sort of huge debt owed to the French because they got exactly what they wanted out of the deal, which was the defeat of the British in the Americas. Now, also just comment that Washington chose to resign after 2 terms. He chose not to run for a 3rd term, and it therefore became tradition in the U.S. to only serve 2 terms. How true is that? I don't really no, I sort of suspect that the way the U.S. system works, especially with how dynamic the country was in these early years, it'd probably be very surprising to imagine any of these presidents being able to serve for more than 2 terms. It's just too dynamic a country in order for a single person to remain in office for that long. And we can recall that didn't actually happen until Franklin Roosevelt. Many, like 150 years or so after the country was founded. So he could have won for a 3rd term, and he chose not to.
This is a minor historical detail that's not really to the point, but I think it's actually Woodrow Wilson in his history that points out that Washington was actually getting unpopular with a good chunk of the country at this point. Jefferson had announced his bid in a sort of oppositional party, one of the first ones in the national country. So there's like the heroic narrative that Washington saw that this would be beneficial to the country's long-term stability to have this informal limit of 2 terms. Or perhaps that he just shouldn't go beyond 2 terms. But there's also a slightly more realist reading, which is that maybe he just wouldn't have won. So that's like a little bit of historical backdrop for that.
So yeah, let's get into the address now, since that's the main point here, and not to sort of debate the realities of Washington's presidency. So what is it? Page 5, I think about halfway down page 5 or so, is when he actually begins the main points of the address. Ryan, would you like to begin with any quotes?
Yeah. So the last paragraph, page 5, is sort of where we're going to start. I'll read this long paragraph, and I'm sure that we'll stop to comment at least every 1 to 2 paragraphs. So this is Washington. The unity of government, which constitutes you, one people, is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, and of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that, from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed, to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. As this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously directed, it is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as of the palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can in any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts.
Yeah, so we just read a lot of material on the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution and how the overthrow of the Articles happened. He spends a lot of time. In fact, one of the main points of this address is actually explaining to the country as a whole. Recall that this address was not was actually just published in papers, and that's how most people read it. It wasn't pronounced, from the halls of the White House to the masses or something. The point of a lot of this address is to insist and do everything he possibly can to affirm that the constitutional government, which he helped usher into being over the Articles of Confederation, absolutely must be preserved. You must basically focus your entire the American mind must be entirely focused on preserving this national unity, this form of government that actually created, a single people out of all of these different colonies that were before separate peoples. And he holds this as really this is the number one issue in this farewell address.
Yeah, it's a total repudiation of the confederal conception of America in favor of a national conception of America. We are one people, one nation. We're not a bunch of different states who are allied because of convenience and shared interests. We are one thing now. We are not 13 things anymore. We're one.
And this is also interesting because this sounds like perhaps other ideas about union that will become popular in a few decades after this is spoken, especially in the lead up to the Civil War. But if you look at Washington's justification for it, it's not nearly so total. It is justly so that this union is dear to us because it protects our real independence, it supports our tranquility at home, our peace abroad, safety, prosperity, and liberty. So it seems for Washington that it's less of a religious ideal, as some people may make it out to be later, and more because that he views this as the best vehicle for the American people, this now national group, to be safeguarded with. So that I think that's important and something to easily look over because it starts to sound perhaps a very modern in how it's being described. But if you follow Washington's line of reasoning, if it doesn't do any of that, then it's not good.
Yeah, that is the corollary. If it ceases to be the palladium of our liberty and the foundation of our prosperity, then maybe it's time for a reevaluation, though he obviously doesn't explore that corollary in this address.
Right. So, and I can continue on to the next section.
Yes, continue.
Yeah, Washington speaking. For this, you have every inducement of sympathy and interest. Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. And I'll just continue because it's connected.
Well, hold on. Let's
okay.
just pause there to say that this is somewhat of an inversion of the traditional understanding of the Ordo Amoris. Classically, your loyalties were concentric. You to your family to your town to your county to your state to the country. Washington is leapfrogging that and saying that the local loyalties should be subordinated to this national identity.
Right, point, and that's also extremely modern given the time frame. But and I'll continue reading because this will make my next point clearer. With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have, in a common cause, fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts, of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. So this is Washington's conception of the nation. We have the same religion, which is fascinating because Washington, of course, understood that there were radically different Christian denominations in the country, and yet still proclaims that we have the same religion, the same manners, habits, and political principles, all of which you would get from your culture, inherited, basically. So this is not an idea conception of the nation that Washington is describing here. This is not something that can just be transplanted, learned in a book, signed on a document or something like that. And this is kind of what I find interesting, and I think it sheds light on what we were previously discussing. It seems that Washington very much has in mind that he acknowledges that there are differences, which is why his same religion comment wouldn't make any sense if he didn't already assume that. But there is a people, in like the actual sense of a people, shared heritage, shared blood, that constitutes the nation now. So that was the point I wanted to make there. Any further?
Yes, there wasn't a nation before, but there is now through, as it says on the screen here, because of the trials of the common dangers and sufferings and successes. The winning of the war forged a nation, a single people, where there were once many peoples.
Right. And I'll continue now. But these considerations, however powerfully they address themselves to your sensibility, are greatly outweighed by those which apply more immediately to your interest. Here, every portion of our country finds the most commanding motives for carefully guarding and preserving the union of the whole. The North, in an unrestrained intercourse with the South, protected by the equal laws of the common government, finds in the productions of the latter greater additional resources of maritime and commercial enterprise, and precious materials of manufacturing industry. The South, in the same intercourse, benefiting by the agency of the North, sees its agriculture grow and its commerce expand. Turning partly into its own channels the seamen of the North, it finds its particular navigation invigorated. And while it contributes in different ways to nourish and increase the general mass of the national navigation, it looks forward to the protection of a maritime strength, to which itself is unequally adapted. The East, in a like intercourse with the West, already finds, and in the progressive improvement of interior communications by land and water, will more and more find a valuable vent for the commodities which it brings from abroad, or manufactures at home. The West derives from the East supplies requisite to its growth and comfort. And what is perhaps of still greater consequence, it must of necessity owe the secure enjoyment of indispensable outlets for its own production to the weight, influence, and the future maritime strength of the Atlantic side of the Union, directed by an indissoluble community of interest as one nation. Any other tenure by which the West can hold this essential advantage, whether derived from its own separate strength, or from an apostate and unnatural connection with any foreign power, must be intrinsically precarious. So this is a fascinating.
We have talked a lot about these tensions and complementary factors between North, South, East, and West, especially early on when we started this show, and he is outlining exactly what historians later observed about these relationships, and we have talked about it in depth. It's also interesting, this part at the end where he talks about unnatural connections with any foreign power. That could potentially be, Spain, for example. I can't remember which book we were reviewing. It might have been one of Jensen's, but we were discussing how, it was possible at one point for the western states along the Mississippi, the idea of some sort of alliance or union with Spain as a separate country was, in the running, if only by a few parties. It was actually something that was contemplated by people who were in the position to pursue that. So what he's saying here is that all these advantages only really exist if you're one nation. You won't have these same advantages if you separate into different countries and form alliances with each other or other powers. It can only be through a singular American nation that all of these things work together.
Right, and it's a different argument than the one he made 2 paragraphs ago. 2 paragraphs ago, he was talking about how history created this union through common suffering and common heritage and common religion. And now he's saying the future creates this union because it is in our economic interest to unify with each other.
Right, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because a good chunk of this is thought to have been written by Hamilton, with heavy editing by Washington, because he thought that Hamilton was being too Hamiltonian in most parts.
That's quite interesting. I can see that.
Yeah, see if you can pick out the different tones here, because it should be pretty easy to figure out when Hamilton is speaking, and very easy to figure out when Washington, the paternalistic elder statesman, is speaking, because as you've already pointed out, we went from heritage, shared struggle, and history immediately to outlets for goods and production in a couple of paragraphs. And anything else on this before we move on? Alrighty. Washington continues. While then every part of our country thus feels an immediate and particular interest in union, all the parts combined cannot fail to find in the united mass of means and efforts greater strength, greater resource, proportionately greater security from external danger, a less frequent interruption of their peace by foreign nations, and what is of inestimable value. They must derive from union an exemption from those broils and wars between themselves, which so frequently afflict neighboring countries not tied together by the same government, which their own rivalships alone would be sufficient to produce, but which opposite foreign alliances, attachments, and intrigues would stimulate and embitter. Hence, likewise, they will avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments, which, under any form of government, are inauspicious to liberty, and which are to be regarded as particularly hostile to republican liberty. In this sense, it is that your union ought to be considered as a main prop of your liberty, and that the love of the one ought to endear to you the preservation of the other. So a few times now on these streams, going back to the first episodes, and then I forget recently, but I forget which stream it was. This is a very old English Civil War thought, this idea that a permanent military establishment would destroy a republic. This goes back to the Levelers and other anti-army factions during the English Civil War. So this is you can sort of you can definitely see our English heritage coming out in this. But
so
more,
much so that so go ahead.
And I was going to say, but more than that, you can see this this idea that Washington's expounding that you can still see today, which is that America is obviously going to be radically different than what it came from, even though you can see our heritage still here, just because of this lack of a isolated space with intense webs of rivalries and alliances, constant wars between neighbors and whatnot else. So this is still lines of arguments that you can see today that Americans still employ whenever, say, I think it was this last week, a Frenchman was saying that if only Americans knew how badly the French viewed them. And many people pointed out that Americans don't care because we don't have to, unlike Europeans who do have to care about what their neighbors think of them. But Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, I was just going to say to underscore your point, the strength of this strain of suspicion towards large military standing establishments is so great that you hear these sentiments emerging from the mouth of the commander-in-chief, from the mouth of General Washington. This is the man who led the Continental Army during the Revolution. He was the generalissimo of America throughout this entire period, and yet even he is expressing this skepticism of a large military standing institution.
And it's one of the first things that we'll read in this that we have not really adhered to, especially when looking at the modern day. The military establishment is an indispensable part of American society and the economy.
Indeed, if you are dissatisfied with the current state of the United States of America, you can look at this speech and only conclude that we richly deserve the waters we are swimming in.
It also facilitates empire, basically immediately after we began having a large standing army, as we discussed I think it was last week when we were talking about the Monroe Doctrine. And basically as soon as the United States started engaging in what is called imperialism and gathering colonies, it just went, it just fell off this slippery slope and accelerated into the 20th century with that pattern of behavior. And that time more or less coincides with the development of a large standing army as well. These things clearly go hand in hand, and one begets the other. And whether it's chicken or egg kind of doesn't really matter. The two things are intrinsically related.
And you can tell as well that this is definitely, or at least you'd think, more Washington speaking, considering, as we read from Beard and Jensen, Hamilton was a strong proponent of using things like a military establishment to bind the Union together. So once again, Washington was known for being independent from Hamilton, in fact, independent from his entire cabinet and group of advisors. So I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is definitely a more Washingtonian, Washingtonite sentiment expressed here. This warning, this old English warning against the military establishment. So
that was my read as well.
Yeah. So continuing.
As a certain Washingtonois.
Yeah, exactly. So continuing, these considerations speak a persuasive language to every reflecting and virtuous mind, and exhibit the continuance of the Union as a primary object of patriotic desire. Is there a doubt whether a common government can embrace so large a sphere? Let experience solve it. To listen to mere speculation in such a case were criminal. We are authorized to hope that a proper organization of the whole, with the auxiliary agency of governments for the respective subdivisions, will afford a happy issue to the experiment. It is well worth a fair and a full experiment. With such powerful and obvious motives to union affecting all parts of our country, while experience shall not have demonstrated its impracticability, there will always be reason to distrust the patriotism of those who in any quarter may endeavor to weaken its bands.
Yeah, it's almost like Washington and Hamilton took turns writing paragraphs here.
Yeah, I was about to say the tone has radically changed.
We're
we're
radically
back,
changed from the previous paragraph.
We're back to talking about states being subdivisions. That's a fascinating assertion, but this is a I don't know if the audience can pick up on this. I think most of the people here on the panel have our own ideas that we come in with, and we try to tone it down, which is why we tend to emphasize perhaps the other direction, a different reading that we can look at. This is something that is fascinating if you don't view it through the lens of the Civil War. Because obviously you could read read all of this as if you were Abraham Lincoln or something like that and say that Washington predicted all of this and the South is bad or something. You don't have to, though. You can read this in terms of you have Britain and France exerting influence over us as this very new and uncertain country and trying to bring us apart or enslave us to their desires or split us into sections or something like that. You can read it through that lens, this nativistic, isolationist lens, that we should stick together as one people, since we are one people, against what foreign powers would have us do. So that's that was my only comment here.
Yeah, and it's certainly a real risk that could have happened. Great Britain is one of the a nation of great diplomats who excel at doing exactly something like that, splitting up a new country like the United States, or waging a 20-ish year long against revolutionary France and winning. So definitely a real concern.
Right, and there were also concerns about France as well. So this was a very uncertain time for the country, and that uncertainty would last until the end of the War of 1812. So, but continuing, in contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern and southern, Atlantic and western, whence designing men may endeavor to excite a belief that there is a real difference of local interests and views. So basic U.S. history thing here is to describe this as sectionalism, and there's a whole thing about sectionalism. It was a concept that was recognized at the time in the antebellum period. You can go read about that, you in the audience. This isn't so much what we care about. I think that the best way to interpret this, at least for our series that we're doing on foreign intervention since the start of November, is that the United States at this point in time, could have very well disunited this early on without really much grievance, much just grievance at least. And it very well could have been due to foreign powers. I think you can get a very good reading out of this whole thing and this idea of geographical and local discriminations weakening the country if you ignore your grievances about the Civil War and whatnot else and look at this through a nativist lens. It would be very easy for other much stronger foreign powers to split the country apart geographically. I'll continue. One of the expedients of party to acquire influence within particular districts is to misrepresent the opinions and aims of other districts. You cannot shield yourselves too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. The inhabitants of our Western country have lately had a useful lesson on this head. They have seen in the negotiation by the executive and in the unanimous ratification by the Senate of a treaty with Spain, and in the universal satisfaction of that event throughout the United States, a decisive proof how unfounded were the suspicions propagated among them of a policy in the general government and in the Atlantic states unfriendly to their interests in regard to the Mississippi. They have been witnesses to the formation of two treaties, that with Great Britain and that with Spain, which secure to them everything they could desire in respect to our foreign relations towards confirming their prosperity. Will it not be their wisdom to rely for the preservation of these advantages on the Union by which they were procured? Will they not henceforth be deaf to those advisers, if such there are, who would sever them from their brethren and connect them with aliens? So once again, a very nativist reading here is that we are a nation with that's connected fraternally. So we are brothers, and I don't think that Washington means that in a metaphorical sense. Really, this is that would be very hard to describe. I think there's definitely a much older reading of this, and further, he's very much pointing out that that if we are to sever our bonds, the only other place to go is towards aliens, people that are not related to us. Any comments so far? Alrighty, I'll continue. To the efficacy and permanency of your union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliances, however strict between the parts, can be an adequate substitute. They must inevitably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances in all times have experienced. Sensible of this momentous truth, you have improved upon your first essay by the adoption of a constitution of government better calculated than your former for an intimate union and for the efficacious management of your common concerns. This government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles, in the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim to your confidence and your support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures, are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the constitution which at any time exists until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. So I'm sure we have comments on that section.
Yeah, this whole section I had highlighted in my own copy. Again, this is clearly Hamilton. This is we have to remember at this time the Constitution has been in force for like 8 years, pretty much exactly, right? And that is roughly as long as the Articles of Confederation lasted. So it's entirely conceivable that there could be another revolution or counter-revolution, depending on which way you want to look at it, to overthrow the Constitution. And of course, it's being argued here that, well, you have the right to self-government, but once everyone's agreed to the government, then you can't just disobey it now. The only way to change the Constitution fundamentally would be to get literally the entire people, whatever that means, to agree to it. And of course, that is the grounds the Constitution was argued to have been brought in on, right? It was argued that the Constitution was based on the will of the entire people through these particular machinations, which, as Beard argued, Washington was one of the major players just because he's Washington, but certainly not one of the, I guess, primary actors in terms of bringing out that counter-revolution that was the Constitution. So I think it's pretty clear who is actually speaking here.
Yeah, and as you say, everyone's agreed to it, and so now you have this duty to obey, but that is for very fuzzy and ill-defined values of everyone.
In defense of Washington here, it's worth pointing out that whenever he did deal with a rebellion against the constitutional order, as opposed to what his other more nationalistic advisors wanted him to do, he did pardon the leaders of that rebellion. So if it is Washington, truly speaking here, I think that there is a slightly more charitable idea of his that he is talking about, as opposed to the more strict interpretation that you could get from others in his cabinet. But still, the point should be taken by the audience that this document, being like the guaranteed and perpetual governing document of the United States, was at no point guaranteed during this time frame, nor was it really organic in its emergence.
No, and you're right. It could be Washington as well. I mean, Washington would agree with this anyway, obviously, because the Constitution greatly benefited him. And it's quite interesting how the Articles of Confederation are specifically called out here, though, as being improved upon by the Constitution. And, as it's argued, it's a clever little trick that the writer is pulling here, basically saying, your right to self-government and the right to change your government isn't being taken away, but the particular manner in which this government was established means that you can't just change it without basically getting the entire country to go through that process again, which obviously sets up a pretty strong barrier in people's minds in what the legitimate means are of changing the government going forward. And it cements the Constitution basically as unchangeable self-government, because obviously it's practically impossible to have the whole people actually change the government. I mean, that's not what happened when the Constitution was brought in. So it's setting up an impossible standard, which means if followed, the Constitution would never be able to change in any fundamental way.
Right, and as I'm sure we'll talk about in later American Spirits episodes into the next year, it was never, the government never fundamentally changed explicitly, like in the governing document details, but it always changed internally, regardless of what the document says. And I'm sure that comes as no surprise to our audience. But if we have nothing else on that, I will continue on to the next paragraph. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations under whatever plausible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle and of fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation the will of a party. Often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of constituent and wholesome plans digested by common councils and modified by mutual interests.
So is Washington suggesting that organized minorities can play a pernicious role in the development of nations?
Well, it's pretty ironic because this is the playbook that the then Federalist misnamed faction created the Constitution. This is exactly what they did, and now it's saying, hey, don't do what we did to the Articles of Confederation, because that would get rid of the thing that we like, which is the Constitution.
Right. Yes. And when I was when I was going through school in history classes, this was always cited as Washington warned against primarily parties and partisanship and whatnot else, which is a very modern sort of center-lefty reading.
Yes, I'm glad we arrived here now, because this is one of the major mysteries of this farewell address, where people who have not actually read it just take it as this trite warning, like, oh, don't have political parties, man. Washington was so forward-looking; he could see that the two-party system was bad, man. But that's not really what's happening here.
Yeah, right. And it's very clear that what he means by party is not an organized political machine meant to field candidates and establish parliamentary order. It's very clear that, and he says it very explicitly in the paragraph that I was in the middle of reading. I guess I didn't get through it. He says it very explicitly that the bad thing about parties is that it turns the public or the national interest inwards to that minority group's interest. If you could imagine such a thing. Like, could you imagine if there was a small, highly organized minority that basically co-opted the entire political organization of the country to support their minorities' highly organized interests? That would
I
be
think we'll have
terrible.
more.
What an alarming
have-
counterfactual, Ryan.
um, let me continue this just really quick, and we'll get to talking about more things that we did not more warnings that we did not heed. However, combinations or associations of the above description may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely, in the course of time and things, to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Like, could you imagine? Could you imagine if a small organized minority used our political machines to basically just destroy the whole process and put unscrupulous politicians into power?
Well, regardless of whether we can imagine it, Ryan, Washington clearly thought that this phenomenon of tiny minorities usurping the government for their own interests is real.
Quite so. It is real. I mean, pun aside, this is what happened. As Charlemagne was pointing out, this is the playbook that they went by, and as with anyone that succeeds by a playbook, the thing that you do after you succeed is just to tell everyone not to do that because that would be bad. And of course, if you did succeed with the playbook, it would be bad if someone used it against you. So,
And
I
Washington was just as successful in that endeavor as Sulla.
I think this will be interesting for the audience to take note of this discussion here by Washington about the power of, without any memes, the power of organized minorities using political machinations to their success. Because I think at some point in the future we are going to have to discuss this idea of elite theory because it's been sort of memed to death. But it's something for the audience to keep in mind. You can already see this back in the Enlightenment very explicitly. These principles, which you've seen memed and attributed to later thinkers, you can see it back then, and it was so common of knowledge that it could be included in a president's farewell address to the whole country. So, continuing. Towards the preservation of your government and the permanency of your present happy state, it is requisite not only that you steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretexts. One method of assault may be to effect in the forms of the Constitution alterations which will impair the energy of the system, and thus to undermine what cannot be directly overthrown. In all the changes to which you may be invited, remember that time and habit are at least as necessary to fix the true character of governments as of other human institutions. That experience is the surest standard by which to test the real tendency of the existing constitution of a country, that facilitates and changes upon the credit of mere hypotheses and opinion, exposes to perpetual change from the endless variety of hypotheses and opinion. And remember especially that for the efficient management of your common interests in a country so extensive as ours, a government of as much vigor as is consistent with the perfect security of liberty is indispensable. Liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed and adjusted, its surest guardian. It is indeed little else than a name, where the government is too feeble to withstand the enterprises of faction, to confine each member of the society within the limits prescribed by the laws, and to maintain all in the secure and tranquil enjoyments of the rights of person and property. This
Yeah, so
sounds
that's
like
interesting
Auron
because
could be tweeting it.
the Articles of Confederation, one of the main complaints by the constitutionalists was that it was exactly too weak to withstand the enterprises of faction, which is, kind of exactly what we're told the Constitution is supposed to ensure, even though that's also wrong. But, basically the Articles of Confederation government was not very effective because unless there was a total unity, within the states, then it would be extremely difficult to really expand the power of the federal government. And of course, it didn't really have a policing power or anything to force the states to, abide by the laws.
Right, and something else is that if you in the audience are wanting to know more about this discussion of organizing a government such that it prevents factions or consolidation or ensures liberty or whatnot else, we already did a stream on the history and different ideologies behind the separation of powers, which you can go read or listen to, rather. I find it interesting, though, that that Washington, at least, is speaking against a tendency that I see in many small private organizations, which is that if something bad happens or if something can be done, something must be done. I do think that this is actually, it's a sort of a very American conservative to talk about the wisdom of the farewell address, but I do feel like this is something that private organizations can also remember, is that time and habit also help. You don't have to do something just because it can be done. And then beyond that, this idea of factions and whatnot else, but he does temper this at the end with this saying that it's just the law is just a name, or the Constitution is just a name if nothing is actually done to enforce it, which sounds very modern. I was assured by many classical liberals and moderates and new right-wingers that this is only a new right, online right, a woke right talking point, this idea that you actually have to enforce laws. I was told that that's very woke, that you just have to hope and pray to the Constitution that it will do something, and eventually it might. So, with that, we will continue. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness, and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purpose of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Now, this is something I would like to point out, just as commentary. Many beautiful losers, American conservatives, National Review types, or whatever, will read this. And they will look at the youth of the country calling out for a coming great leader and an individual, an autocrat, a personalist. And they will look at these warnings and say that we must stop this, get the youth. But if you look at what Washington is describing here, it's not the people actually calling for it that's the cause of the whole problem, if this is to be viewed as a problem, which Washington does. That's not the point. The point is the domination by organized minorities, or parties or factions, as he's called them, that serve to divide the nation, benefit small minorities at the expense of the public. That's what causes this clamoring for a strong individual, a strong man, if you will.
Yeah,
that's
a really important point to make, Ryan. The hue and cry for a strong man, for an autocrat, for a Caesar, if you will, to come in and solve all of our problems. Whilst that's not a good thing, it's the natural human reaction to the spirit of party, to the domination of the society and the government by small parties of interested people who are usurping the power of government for their own ends. This is the call for a Caesar is a symptom. It kind of prefigures Spengler in that way, because of course the Caesar period in Spenglerian cycles is the last period. It's the end of a civilization. And Washington is taking a very long view here. And as much as we idealize George Washington, it's very clear from these last few paragraphs and from the next few paragraphs that he was first and foremost a realist. He understood human nature, and he could cast forward to see how human nature would play itself out in the circumstances of the American nation.
Right, and I do find this fascinating. You can see these ideas that we associate with modern thinkers, likely because we found them during a specific time on the internet. You can definitely see them in much older figures. So, once again, anything that you can attribute to a modern thinker because you came across some account or thinker or academic attributing it to a modern thinker, you can very easily find it elsewhere. I think that exhausts about what we could comment on this. Don't attack the symptom if you actually want to solve
Well,
the
not
problem.
quite, because I'll just point out Washington was foresighted, because within 70 years of this address, the spirit of party, as Washington would have understood it, got 500,000 Americans killed in the Civil War. That same spirit of party is metastasizing in our own day and has half the country at the throat of the other half of the country. So Washington's describing a very real phenomenon that he had seen throughout history and that we have seen him vindicated in.
Right. No, I wasn't saying that he was wrong or something like that. But what I am saying is that you can get a much more realistic analysis or a much briefer analysis, perhaps, from this man who did predict that. That was the point that I was mostly trying to make. With that, we can continue on. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and the duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which find a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another.
And here we shift.
But could you just look at the last 70, 80 years of American history, and this is exactly what is played out, part by part, basically. You can definitely see that the policy and will of this country has been subjected to the policy and will of another, or multiple others, given the decade. And you can see which channels those groups used the national people, the public, for their benefit. This is remarkably far-sighted. And he continues, there is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This, within certain limits, is probably true, and in governments of monarchical caste, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of party. But in those of the popular character, and governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendency, it is certain there will always be enough of that spirit for every salutary purpose, and there being constant danger of excess, the effort ought to be, by force of public opinion, to mitigate and assuage it. A fire not to be quenched, it demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest instead of warming it should consume. So speaking about parallels to Spengler here, this is also fascinating because one of the hallmarks of a Caesar, if you will, someone that actually, the person that we've already established is the result of this increased party spirit or this increased factionalism, is that he's supposed to rise above the factional disputes and sort of institute or revive as much as he can a national character. This is fascinating because that's what Washington is saying needs to happen in order to prevent it, which it
And
would
it's
make
what
sense.
he, in fact, is doing and had been
Yes.
doing for the prior decade. Washington, he was in the background during the transition from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, but he was not one of the main movers and shakers. And in that sense, he was able to position himself as above it. He's taking this position as, the father of the nation, moving impartially for the benefit of the whole nation and not for any one faction. At least that's how he tried to position himself and how he's positioning himself in this address.
And to strengthen the modern allegory that everyone should be thinking of here, the parties that we're forming that Washington is explicitly speaking against are ones based around foreign alliances. As mentioned at the outset, you had his cabinet pretty strongly divided between Francophilia and Anglophilia, alliance with the French or alliance with the British. And Washington is very much trying to strike out a national position in opposition to both of those, and that seeks to put the interests of the country and of the people first, rather than the interests of another. So this is very much him trying to prevent these parties forming, which, as any student of American history should know, they were formed along geographic lines, but the cause once again was specifically foreign policy. Who should we ally with? Washington is very much a pioneer of this nobody stance. We should not be perpetually tied to one side or another. So, if there are no other comments, I'll continue. It is important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration, to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the powers of one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one, and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. A just estimate of that love of power and proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart, is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power, by dividing and distributing it into different depositories and constituting each the guardian of the public weal against invasions by the others, has been evinced by experiments ancient and modern, some of them in our country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always...
That's remarkably frank.
The precedent must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield.
Yeah, so again, don't do what we did.
Yeah, this is one of the other major diversions from what Washington recommends should be done and what America has actually done, where the powers have been completely and utterly usurped with no change to the Constitution through the established process of amendment. We see this literally on a daily basis, practically. I shouldn't say literally, practically a daily basis with these, district judges issuing injunctions against, the president of the United States. I mean, we've been over this before. The separation of powers in the United States has been entirely usurped. You have the managerial revolution for one thing, which I think we're all familiar with. The idea
in which Washington also addresses, and this is later in this address. Yes,
indeed. So I don't think we need to belabor the point, but yeah, I mean this is one of the most extreme points at which America has taken the bad path in terms of what Washington recommends not doing.
Right, yeah.
But which Washington did.
Yes. So this is actually interesting. Most of the domestic prescriptions from Washington are just him telling people to come after him not to do what the nationalists did. However, on the foreign policy scale, I think that he was largely consistent, or the foreign policy side of things, which I think, as we discussed in Common Sense, kind of this idea that it's absurd that a country as large as ours should be beholden to such a tiny country across the waters. This idea that the United States should be enslaved to the will of another country, which is so far removed from us. The fact that he did actually follow through with that, and as did many of his successors, I think at least that should be heeded by the audience. We've shown where they most certainly did not follow what they're teaching, the nationalists and the federalists. But it's worth keeping in mind that this is something they did keep. This idea of non-intervention, this idea of neutrality, keeping us from sending our wealth and blood over for another nation's gain. This is something that we did follow for a long time. So we will continue. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of man and citizens. I'm just going to stop there for a second. We're talking about Washington's laying out the prerequisites for a free people throughout this entire farewell address. We have gone over quite a number of them so far. And we're getting to the point now where Washington is saying, without being sectarian, mind you, this is a very important note to make. He is not arguing for, a national conversion to one specific unified state church necessarily, but basically just the idea of attacking religion and morality completely undermines the entire society. Fascinating. If one could re-engineer this entire farewell address in the opposite direction to figure out what you should do to destroy the country, that might be a fun project at the end of the stream to see if we can do that and compare it to what's happened. But I'll continue. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. So this is fascinating because most people would hear this and think that it's based and whatnot else, but this is almost directly out of Locke. Have you even read Locke?
I have.
Good, because here it is in the principle of this farewell address. But this is fascinating. I don't know if either of you have any more comments on this, but I don't really see this argument as expounded as much anymore. This idea that this is the basis of truth, so any promise or oath made without it cannot be a promise or an oath.
Yeah, I mean, that we don't. I mean, how many jurisdictions now leave the "so help me God" out of the oath when they administer it these days? But the other thing, the point he makes at the end, I'm struggling to articulate this comment, but he says that refined education has an influence on minds of peculiar structure, but reason and experience forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusions of religious principle. In other words, it is foolish to expect the normie to reason himself to moral conclusions and base his life upon them. He needs religion in order to behave morally. Only minds of peculiar structure theoretically might be able to do it without religion, and even that Washington is entertaining a hypothetical there.
Right. It is worth pointing out he says whatever can be conceded to the peculiar structure
Yeah.
reason and experience of the mind. So it's not even attributed fully, but even partially. Obviously, at the time, this is sort of a jab against the more revolutionary or Jeffersonian influences of the country.
Or French Revolutionary.
Yeah, that's what I meant. The radical types. But this is fascinating because once again, it's easy to forget that the country was divided into state churches on the state level throughout many of the states at this point in time. They were institutions. People in Massachusetts would pay a tax for the sustenance of that state church in Massachusetts up until the 1840s, for instance. At which point, I think it was struck down by the courts. Like it wasn't voluntarily, or at least on the state level, dissolved, as in say Virginia. So it's worth pointing out what Washington is saying here is very, very prescient for the modern age. But I'm sure we are not the first ones to tell you this, you and the audience. But something to consider that others might not actually get to is that what Washington is describing here is not just that we need to be vaguely evangelical or vaguely religious, but there must be a predominant religion in the public square that we know people adhere to, and that's the only way we can even trust them. So that meant something different in his time. That's not just we need to have the Bible on the radio more often or something like that. What Washington has in mind here is established religion basically acting as a private social regulation. So, it's worth considering. Continuing, it is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. Promote, then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. In proportion as the structure of a government gives force to public opinion, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. We should not be the ones to inform our audience that the usual interpretation of this, that Washington would just really love the public education system. It's so wholesome. We need to throw more money at public education to enlighten the public. That might not be what he's getting at here, because clearly the end that Washington is after is public enlightenment. And you can look out the window. There's not much public enlightenment whatsoever. It's almost as if this goes hand in hand with what he was just talking about, the religion and morality. It would be very hard to separate those two, after all. Unless there's any comments on that, I'll continue. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it. Avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertions in time of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidable wars may have occasioned, not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear.
Is there any? Do we even need a comment on this? I mean, just
add
this
it,
just
add it to
speaks
the
for
list of
itself, doesn't it?
warnings. Yeah, add it to the list of warnings.
Brian, what is the current burden we've heaped upon our posterity as of the modern day?
Yeah, it's over 30 trillion, and that's not even counting inflationary effects. I used to, when I was much younger and going through the school system, I used to keep track of the debt, at least like what the nearest big number was. But it's quite frankly rocketed so high recently that it's somewhere over 30 trillion. I don't know where.
We didn't listen.
Wow, it's almost 40 trillion now. That's incredible. I thought it was around 30 trillion, but it's actually around 40 trillion.
It was around 30 trillion when I was in high school. So like I remember like freaking out, like, wow, it just passed it. So the execution of these maxims belongs to your representatives, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. To facilitate to them the performance of their duty, It is essential that you should practically bear in mind that toward the payment of debts, there must be revenue. That to have revenue, there must be taxes. That no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant. That the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for a candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue, which the public exigencies may at any time dictate. So, there's a very self-serving idea here. Obviously, Washington had to deal with a taxation rebellion or two during his presidency, and he's calling on people to accept it. I do find it fascinating towards our modern ideas that, number one, Washington, and I'm sure many of the people at this time, viewed a taking on of debt in defense of the country as necessary, number one, and that defense in our times may not always be with a organized and explicit military force. But number two, the debt is still important, and it should be done away with basically as soon as possible in times of peace. And at least with the rhetoric that Washington is using after the struggle is over, after the war is done, if the debt still persists, the damage to the country is not actually fixed. Your posterity is still paying off what you have left to them. So I think that's
Washington delivers two exhortations here. He exhorts the representatives not to go into debt. He exhorts the people to pay their taxes. One of these exhortations is backed by force, and one of them is not. I leave it as an exercise for the audience, which is which.
Right. Yes. So that's a before that. That's a little bit of nuance that I think we can use on the right currently, because there's a lot of people, I think, engaging in somewhat friendly fire against representatives that may have actually been on our side, at least in action. Maybe not rhetoric, but in action during the last 5 years, for focusing on one and not the other. But either way, Washington continues. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and, at no distant period, a great nation, to give to mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruits of such a plan would richly repay any temporary advantages which might be lost by a steady adherence to it? Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at last, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, is it rendered impossible by its vices?
Yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is most certainly yes, but I think this is also somewhat important to highlight as well. A major theme throughout this and many political writings of the era is that you cannot just be high time preference and do what feels good now, what's expedient now, what provides the most economic benefit now, what provides the most political benefit now, and expect anything stable and good to result from it. Because the American right is in such great crisis, I think that there's a tendency to forget that, a tendency to perhaps attack people pointing out the long-term ramifications of actions presently taken. But that's a bad tendency that really should not be countenanced, I think. You do need to get out of the crisis in one piece, certainly. This is not an argument against it, but you should not do so to the permanent dissolution of your people. So that was my comment. Okay, all right. We'll continue. And and the other thing as well, this is only made possible by the virtue. Any toleration of the vice will certainly sink this. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent inveterate and antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. So, This is fascinating. We should not have a permanent attachment to particular nations and passionate attachments to them, and we should be just and amicable towards all.
Yeah,
What happens? What does the next sentence say?
The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave.
Interesting.
that is a real sentiment.
It's I don't know. It's kind of like those forbidden terms that were developed by the far right in the 70s may have just been in line with the founding generation. Things that we can't really say on YouTube without getting banned, but have acronyms. It's almost like that's not actually radical. Hilarious. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental and trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. At other times, it makes the animosity of the nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty, of nations has been the victim. So I find this fascinating because in right-wing meme thought, it's very based to have such extreme animosity towards other nations, other races, and whatnot else. But Washington is correctly pointing out here that that's very easy to be taken advantage of, and it will cost you the country, the peace, the liberty, which your ancestors have so dearly fought for in blood for their posterity, only for that posterity to then go and ruin it because they were really mad at some other group or something like that.
It probably is the case that there are certain antipathies toward other nations that are rapidly on the verge of going too far. Not that they're unjustified, but we must be careful not to excessively hate other nations to the point at which that sort of commitment to hating that nation leads us astray.
Yes, that's an important warning. The audience will obviously have picked up on the point that there are today certain excessive attachments which lead us astray, but excessive hostilities are equally dangerous. And Washington's advice is very wise here to preserve your objectivity and be friendly where you can be friendly, be hostile where you have to be hostile, but don't ever make it, an iddy fix in your mind or in your ideology.
And you can very clearly see this. This wasn't as much of a problem until primarily the Second World War. We're not going to delve too far into that. This won't become a World War II stream. But you can definitely see in the personal writings of the politicians there, for the first time, are animated into provoking a war because of their hostilities towards various different countries. So this is less talking about the modern day. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, I was about to say, maybe this very easily applies to all the neocon wars that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I more had in mind that the radical transformation of the country in foreign policy under the FDR administration, you can very easily see the animosity in each of the major individuals and FDR himself towards places like Germany and Japan, and how this animosity spurs them into starting a war, rescinding liberties, completely transforming the country, and all the other stuff which we negatively associate with the prosecution of the Second World War. So this is something that can be forgotten, but it is still this pattern which Washington is describing here is very much to blame for our modern day tragedies, just as much as what we're about to discuss. So Washington continues. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter, without adequate inducement or justification. It
Wow, I
leads.
wonder if that's happened any time in the last 20 years.
Oh man, just wait. We can hypothesize so much in the next few sentences. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions by unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealously, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges are withheld.
Well, it's good that the
Washington.
United States has not selected one particular nation to have special privileges that no one else gets, and it's also very good that no one ever retaliated for exactly that, especially right at the turn of the century.
And Washington forecasts that these privileges would induce resentment in other nations for these privileges that they are denied. But Washington, of course, is not so crazy as to suggest that these same privileges might be extended to a favored nation yet denied to Americans themselves. That would never happen, and so Washington doesn't talk about that.
Well, we'll continue. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding with the appearances of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation.
Ryan, what are we doing here? Pony Express is the comedy show.
I think
I
that
couldn't have described certain Congress people better than Mr. Washington has.
Unfortunately, if we're laughing this hard at Washington just so clearly predicting it, I think that it's more tragedy than comedy, but so it is.
Well, sometimes you gotta laugh so you don't cry.
That is true.
Indeed.
That is the feeling that I get most of the times when we laugh on this stream. So,
I mean, it's not even a reaching prediction either. I mean, it's absolutely a 101% perfectly accurate. Could not write a better description of this modern ill myself. It's 100% perfect.
If you rewrote this in like Appalachian or Southern parlance, you could very easily
You'd be arrested.
Oh yeah, you'd be.
Yeah, I mean, if you wrote this
arrested,
today, you'd be. It would be hate speech.
Yeah, it would be hate speech, or you could attribute it to like extremely radical people from the last century whom you're never supposed to name, lest you be put on watch lists and no-fly lists or whatever. But thankfully for Washington, he knew that our diction would change over time, and so he wrote this in a mildly antiquated manner so that we can read it out for you here on YouTube tonight. So
let's just quickly, since Yiz just sent us a super chat pertaining to this, Yiz for $2 says this bit is 100% describing Lindsey Graham, and yes, I'm pretty sure that's exactly who we're all thinking.
Yes, please do not super chat the quiet part.
So we'll continue because we're going to expound upon this idea that we've just radically proposed for the first time in history. This thing that we've never observed. As avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. That last sentence is ironic because it's kind of the other way around. But like, could you imagine if this small and weak nation was using the arts of seduction to tamper with our domestic parties, our perhaps our intelligence, like our private intelligence.
If a man as foresighted as Washington got that bit wrong, it's because reality is just stranger than any speculation one could write.
Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government.
Remarkable that he actually has to try really hard here to convince people that foreign influence is something that exists and should be taken seriously.
I mean, we say that, but that's just because with American Spirits Wake, we know the audience that we're speaking to here. We still struggle to get normal people to understand that foreign influence is bad, actually. And in fact, it is still the awake, independent patriot, the enlightened patriot that stands against all of this. Maybe
Blessed are
Washington
the
was,
noticers.
I mean, maybe Washington was woke. He's telling us to be awake. A free people is awake, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to be against foreign influence, against seductive and baneful foreign influences.
Paging James Lindsay.
I would love to hear James Lindsay, because I mean, Washington says we have to be awake. So, but that jealousy to be useful must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side, and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other.
Yeah, so Washington again is repeating his call for moderation and impartiality in these things. Excessive hatred is just as dangerous as excessive attachment, and in fact becomes a weapon in the psyop, although Washington obviously wouldn't use that term.
Like, could you imagine if a foreign nation psyoped us into really loving it and to really, really hating even like the normal people of the countries that it wanted to invade and attack? Could you imagine? By the way, you can go back to our previous stream, Pat Buchanan's "Who's War" essay, where we can talk about that hypothetical turning into a reality. And we'll continue. Real patriots.
Real patriots. I don't think we have a real Americans ready here, but
like we are. Who are the real patriots, if not us? Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests.
Oh, he's just cruising here with this.
If this was written in the 1970s, it would be, it would be on the same list as other works which are banned and which the FBI has planted on people who have conducted bombings of federal buildings.
Now, I guarantee if you selected the sort of, let's say the last, 5 paragraphs or so, and just distributed that without attributing it, not only would people think it's contemporary, but it would also be regarded exactly as you just described as basically hateful and extremist.
Yeah, I cannot. I don't blame some people for attributing at least some sort of prophetic attribute to these people, just because we're reading this right now and it cannot be more to the point. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is, in extending our commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here let us stop. So this is interesting. So everything up to this point has been so heavy-handed, even though this document is written in the late 18th century. I feel like this might be easy for the audience to gloss over. The answer is not to pick the good people in response to being yoked to the bad people. The answer is not to pick the good people and yoke us to them. because that will just cause the same problem no matter how much you love this or that foreign nation, even if they are, say, the home country. Places like the other Anglo nations or other European nations or whatnot else. The answer is not that. The answer that Washington is laying out, and the one that he claims to have followed, is that we should have no political connection unless we've already promised it, and in which case fulfill it and then stop. But we just should have commercial connections with all the other nations. Now, so speaking of just tweeting this out in the modern day without attribution, if someone tweeted this is straight out of the American Libertarian Playbook. This is one of the only groups that have kept this idea alive, which is why they have come up so much in the series, is because they are the only ones to harp on non-interventionism in foreign policy and the evils that have come with the interventions, but also what should have happened in the historical option, which was to have the economic connection. So there are many disagreements to be had with them, but here is the man himself, Washington, describing that position and using his own administration to support it. We'll continue. Europe has a set of primary interests, which to us have none, or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. So, once again, Washington is not talking about a Levantine country in the 21st century. He's talking about Britain and France. But if you ignore that and apply it to the modern day, it applies just as much. There are interests in the Middle East and alliance webs and places that have so little bearing on the United States itself that even the politicians making the choices don't really understand what's going on over there when they decide to intervene. So this is a very practical consideration on Washington's part. This is inorganic, if you will. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance. When we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected. When belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us provocation. When we may choose peace or war as our interest, guided by justice, shall counsel. I don't really. Has this actually happened without our own provocation? Would be my question, and that might be a contentious one to ask. But I would like to know if we actually have been assaulted without some sort of prior instigation. Ironically, this may be one of the places that he predicted, which is otherwise very reasonable at the time, that might not have come true. So,
well, there's a couple things there. As far as have we ever been in conflicts that we didn't provoke? I don't know enough about the War of 1812 to comment on that one, but none are coming to mind. But his prediction that we will shortly be too strong for people to provoke us, that certainly came true. We are strong enough that it's foolish to provoke us at the very least. But whether we're doing the provoking, that's a different question, and obviously not what Washington is advocating.
Yeah, right. I was kind of pointing out that he viewed this idea that we would grow strong and respectable on the national stage as like the guarantee of our neutrality, but seems to have been correlated with the exact opposite. The stronger we get on the national stage, somehow the more intertwined we get and the less neutral. So
yeah, I haven't thought about that question deeply, but that's a good question.
So it's that I actually I have my own leanings, of course, but that would be a discussion that might be useful for anyone listening, should you want to make that your thing. Washington continues. Why forgo the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? So, this is once again rhetoric that we still use in the modern day. Why did we give up our prosperity, our dignity as a country, our national pride, and whatnot else for the benefit of a foreign country so far away? Washington asks the same questions. Why would you? What's the benefit? It's certainly not the national benefit. It's not the benefit of the people. So,
Oh, I can think of 7,000 benefits.
yeah, right. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. I might even repeat that. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. So far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be understood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. I hold the maxim no less applicable to the public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. I repeat it, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense. But in my opinion, it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. So this is, once again, the father of the nation, as he is so often known, saying that a permanent entanglement of the United States with the foreign world, in terms of politics and alliance, is necessarily bad for our country, and is not the true policy of the country. So this is not just something that you heard as a libertarian and now have to cast off because you're no longer a libertarian and you have to reject what the libertarians said. This is Washington himself, long before the idea of an American libertarianism was self-consciously formulated, saying that the true policy is not to intertwine the country into the affairs of the rest of the world.
But Ryan, I read it in Reason magazine. How else am I to expiate that sin?
Keep in mind that what is happening right now too. I mean, right now in terms of when Washington wrote this, is that Europe, particularly France, was in the middle of a cataclysmic revolution. So it's not like this was written during a time of peace. And obviously, we can look at intervention in the two world wars and whether or not we those aren't like special cases. What I'm saying, because the French Revolution is certainly comparable to the turmoil of the First World War. Obviously, the magnitude is completely different simply because of population and technology. But we don't have to treat the world wars as special cases because the French Revolution can certainly be counted among them. And yet, Washington is holding exactly to this recommendation to simply stay out of these violent European affairs.
And more than that, throughout this entire speech, he has warned against giving up these longer, more eternal principles in exchange for temporary convenience and expediency. So not only has he ruled out like the time of crisis, embedding ourselves with Europe, or with the rest of the foreign world, as he's called it, he has already ruled out earlier on in the speech doing so for quick gain, basically. Even if it looks good currently, the spirit from Washington here, even if it looks good now, it betrays our future selves and our posterity. So this is not to put too fine a point on it, but I feel like many people in our sphere, kind of as Mr. Quinn was sarcastically pointing out, many people in our sphere started as libertarians, became non-libertarian or perhaps extremely anti, and in the process have tried to just adopt the opposite of whatever the libertarians are saying because they're annoying, gross, stupid libertarians, and so have also dropped this idea of neutrality that Washington is describing. But that's a very self-defeating sentiment. This is cutting off your own heritage to spite your former time, say as a libertarian or as a constitutionalist or a conservative or whatever else. Many people in the neo-reactionary sphere certainly do the same thing, though that was more common 5 years ago. It is possible and this is, keep in mind, Washington did maintain neutrality during the French Revolution, during his time in office, when we were not a great power, and when we were at much more of a risk from Britain and France than we are now. It was possible to maintain neutrality then. It is certainly possible now that you are such a great power in the 21st century. So, possibility is not the question. Washington will continue. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishments on a respectably defensive posture, we may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations, are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest, but even our commercial policy should hold an equal and impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means the streams of commerce, but forcing nothing, establishing with powers so disposed, in order to give to trade a stable course, to define the rights of our merchants, and to enable the government to support them, conventional rules of intercourse, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary and liable to be from time to time abandoned or varied, as experience and circumstances shall dictate. Suddenly Hamilton's back writing. But I do find this fascinating because, once again, the American libertarians, who are so much derided by the online right, are again the only ones to really uphold this principle that commercial policy should not be partial. In fact, they were some of the first ones on the ground opposing NAFTA because it was a deal with specific nations, establishing partiality where there shouldn't be. The reasoning is different, but it's still roughly the same policy, roughly the same sentiments, just with slightly different first principles. So, something to consider. Constantly keeping in view that it is folly in one nation to look for disinterested favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence for whatever it may accept under that character, that by such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having given equivalents for nominal favors, and yet of being reproached with ingratitude for not giving more. Could you imagine if we gave special treatment to a country and we just received ingratitude? That would be surely me, the American citizen, hearing this in the 1790s would think that would surely lead to just a complete severing of ties to such an ungrateful nation.
Indeed, where are the blessings for the favors?
There can be no greater error than to expect or calculate upon real favors from nation to nation. It is an illusion which experience must cure, which of just pride ought to disregard. So there's multiple ways to interpret this, but I think that it's very interesting that Washington, or Hamilton, it doesn't really matter here, is trying to dispel this vibes-based notion of international relations, that we have like natural favors or friendships or ties to these other places. No, the thing that should guide America in terms of commercial, foreign, or other external political policies is the interest of the American people. And as Washington has so strongly laid out, the interest of the American people will be, basically at all times, a policy of neutrality and non-interference. Any such interference would just place us in the maddened and warped old world. So it's something to keep in mind. This pragmatism is not pure pragmatism. There are principles underlying it. It's just that the pragmatism is for the American people. In offering to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I dare not hope they will make the strong and lasting impression I could wish, that they will control the usual current of the passions, or prevent our nation from running the course which has hitherto marked the destiny of nations. Oh, if only. If only this was such a strong speech. But if I may even flatter myself that they may be productive of some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism, this hope will be a full recompense for the solicitude for your welfare by which they have been dictated.
Yeah, I see why they stopped reading this in the House of Representatives.
Did we have a year when they stopped that? I was going to look that up.
1984.
Fascinating. Maybe some consciences were convicted. But I suppose we can lament that this has not been as powerful as Washington had not even dreamed for it to be. But if you want a sort of heritage or national continuity rather, that's what we're doing now. We are occasioning this speech for advice and for insight rather, I guess now, into our own affairs. So we are living
this
out what we
speech
hoped.
really is a capstone on the last 6 months here at American Spirits, as we have slogged through books and articles, developing themes and coming to conclusions, only to reach Washington, and he pretty much just sums it all up for us. This is the formula.
Yes, he posts just the best green text you've ever seen.
So he continues. How far in the discharge of my official duties I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated, the public records and other evidences of my conduct must witness to you and to the world. To myself, the assurance of my own conscience is that I have at least believed myself to be guided by them. In relation to the still subsisting war in Europe, my proclamation of the 22nd of April, 1793, is the index to my plan. Sanctioned by your approving voice, and by that of your representatives in both houses of Congress, the spirit of that measure has continually governed me, uninfluenced by any attempts to deter or divert me from it.
And that proclamation, that was the neutrality proclamation in regards to the war between.
That was him saying we were not going to give in to France's demands of a permanent alliance and defend their colonies in the Caribbean. So, once again, many people attribute this to some pure Machiavellianness, but thankfully, this was the tradition that was laid out as a result of that.
Can you imagine the opportunity that was squandered, though, to involve ourselves in Haiti?
Imagine what Haiti would look like now if only we had been there to develop it. After deliberate examination with the aid of the best lights I could obtain, I was well satisfied that our country, under all the circumstances of the case, had a right to take, and was bound in duty and interest to take, a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined, as far as should depend upon me, to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. The considerations which respect the right to hold this conduct, it is not necessary on this occasion to detail. I will only observe that according to my understanding of the matter, that right, so far from being denied by any of the belligerent powers, has been virtually admitted by all. The duty of holding a neutral conduct may be inferred, without anything more, from the obligation which justice and humanity impose on every nation, in cases in which it is free to act, to maintain inviolate the relations of peace and amity towards other nations. So just to stop here, once again, it's very clear reading this that Washington would reject a sort of Burnhamite pragmatist view of intervention, that we should intervene when it's inconvenient on paper, say, or convenient strategically or something like that. It's very clear that Washington's idea of pragmatic neutrality is much more strict than that. Something that I could see many people reading this coming away thinking Washington was pragmatic. I will be too, therefore we can have intervention sometimes. I think it's pretty clear you would have misread what Washington is getting at here. There are higher appeals and morals that are being cited. The inducements of interest for observing that conduct will best be referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time to our country to settle and mature its yet recent institutions, and to progress without interruption to that degree of strength and consistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tread. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that, after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. Relying on its kindness in this as in other things, and actuated by that fervent love towards it, which is so natural to a man who views in it the native soil of himself and his progenitors for several generations, I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promise myself to realize without alloy the sweet enjoyment of partaking, in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. George Washington.
And with that, we've read the vast majority, all of the really essential elements, skipping the introductory parts, of George Washington's famous farewell address. And this has certainly been one of my favorite streams, actually, that we've done so far. It's this address is so cutting to the exact problems that the United States has, let's not say stumbled, but willfully thrown itself into.
Yes, we cannot claim ignorance.
Yeah, certainly. This is in fact, if you look at a lot of the politicians and other leaders that are responsible for completely abrogating this, I think you really start to get a just and rightly ordered emotional response against those people, just because of how deprived they have left the generations thereafter. We have been denied this system, which people like Washington fought for, even with the imperfections that we have discussed at length in multiple previous streams on here, reading multiple different books by learned men. Even with those defects, it is still very difficult not to have the rightful and just emotional response that this has in fact been taken from us.
It's quite interesting looking at the Monroe Doctrine on episode 19, I think. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I think I had said 1 week at the beginning. And then looking at this, there seems to be a pattern emerging in which our modern or later incarnations of the American ruling class would throw out the very coherent and precise wisdom of the actual founding fathers, and every step away from their advice has demonstrably caused immense damage to the country, to the nation in particular.
I don't know that I can add much. This whole thing really speaks for itself, I think.
That it does.
Yeah, I think we can just go to the super chats. I mean, it very much did speak for itself. And
before we get to the super chats, I have a regular chat that I would like to read out of spite.
Very well.
Major Ken says, have y'all looked into the Monroe Doctrine and if it relates to today? Seems we are going back into it post-COVID. Well, I have good news for you, Major Ken. We are scheduled to talk about the Monroe Doctrine. It'll be the stream after Dave the Distributist comes on to talk about American distributism.
Oh, man.
All right, Charlemagne, could you take the super chats? My voice is ever so slightly tired.
Yes, absolutely. So we covered Giz the Unix already. Thank you very much for your support. We've got Christopher Burks, $4.58 for $2. He sends us a salute. Thank you as well for your support.
Thank you, sir.
It looks like Dawn Browning's name is now like messed up or something, but she sends us 10 Australian dollars with a super sticker of an anthropomorphic video game controller standing with arms crossed while a cascade of sunglasses fall into place on his face in a continuous thug life meme style. Yeah. Let me scroll up. Wow, it is actually a Thug Life. It is literally the Thug Life glasses. I haven't seen that one before, so that one's very much appreciated, actually. I didn't know they had so many of these super stickers. So, thank you very much. And Bolero393 also for $10. So many Edmund Genet in our midst. Mass deportations now. Well,
Yes.
thank you very much,
Well,
Bolero393.
something to keep in mind is that Genet was he was not just some hoi polloi. He was a representative of a foreign government tasked with getting our men and resources to go support that foreign government. The mass
Wow.
deportations would not solve that problem. It would be a much more radical solution that is not currently on the table to solve that.
Very true. So, yes, that's well, that covers it. I mean, that was a great stream. I really enjoyed that one. Next week, we are covering Oliver Wendell Holmes' The Common Law, which will be a little bit of a divergence from what we've been doing. I actually had the tab up describing it because there was a good little quote. Yes, here. Just from the Wikipedia page, a famous aphorism appears on the first page of the book. Quote, "The life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience," end quote. And indeed, that is very much the essence of English common law. So we'll be looking into that part of our legal tradition next week.
Yes,
Very exciting.
it's a break from our foreign policy streams, and after that, we'll be taking back up the foreign policy until Christmas. But it's worth keeping in mind that our legal traditions too are our heritage, and they too can be corrupted just as well as the national interest can by, say, foreign influence or just foreign ideas, perhaps. I don't know, Mr. Quinn, is that too far off the mark to bait the audience into watching us next
Foreign
week?
influence, foreign ideas, or, by Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Perfect. Alrighty.
All right. Well, I think we can close out. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and we